Montana Territory. June 1873, the girl came up from the river like a broken branch, spinning lifeless in the current. Owen Ashford had just unsaddled his bay mare when he caught the flash of pale blue between the trees. He dropped the bridle and ran, boots pounding the muddy riverbank. Water surged high from spring melt, fast and loud. A body tumbled past arms, skirt, hair all tangled in motion. He dove without thinking. The river was cold enough to burn. He fought the current, arms stretching out in wide strokes until his fingers brushed fabric. He grabbed hold of her waist, pulling her to his chest, kicking hard as they spun toward the shallows. Her head lolled against his shoulder. She was breathing. Barely. Owen dragged her onto the gravel bar, coughing river water from his lungs. She lay on her side, soaked and shivering, lips pale as snow. Her dress was torn at the hem, fine muslin now clinging like second skin. She looked young, 18, maybe 19, but not local. Not with a dress like that. Not with skin that soft and hands without calluses. "Hey," he said, leaning over her, brushing wet hair from her face. "You hear me?" She blinked slowly. "You hurt," her lips parted, but no words came. There was blood on her forehead, a faint red line where she must have hit something. He took off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "What's your name?" She hesitated, eyes flickering like she was trying to remember. "Rowena," she whispered hoarsely. "Rowena Whitlow." "All right, Rowena, you are going to be fine. I am getting you out of here." He carried her to the horse, carefully setting her in the saddle before swinging up behind her. She leaned into him like all the strength had left her. He kept one arm around her waist and urged the mare uphill, away from the river's edge. His little cabin sat a half-mile west, tucked in the pines. He had built it by hand 4 years ago after riding up from Texas, looking to start again. He lit the stove, set a kettle on, and laid her on the cot covered with wool blankets. Her skin was like ice. "Stay awake," he told her, kneeling beside her with a towel. "You hit your head. You need to stay with me." She stirred, blinking toward the flickering firelight. "Where am I? My place. I found you in the river." She flinched. "I remember the water." "Nothing before that." "No family nearby." She shook her head slowly. "No, I do not know where I was going." Owen didn't press. She looked like she had been through hell already. He cleaned the cut on her forehead and gave her hot tea with a little sugar. She drank slow, both hands shaking around the cup. When the worst of the cold left her fingers, she looked up at him with wide, grateful eyes. "Thank you for saving me." He gave a small nod. "You are safe now." They were quiet after that. The storm outside pressed against the windows. Wind moaned in the trees. She fell asleep wrapped in his coat, breath coming steady now. Owen sat by the fire, boots off, shirt damp from the river. He watched her sleep, that stranger with the river eyes and a name like a song. There were no answers yet, but something about her being there filled the place in a way it never had before. When morning came, she was still there, alive, breathing, real. He made biscuits and strong coffee. She sat at the table in his second shirt, sleeves rolled up. She looked better. Still tired, but warmer, brighter. "I remember something," she said as he handed her a plate. "A stagecoach. There was a man shouting, then I think we went off the road." Owen sat across from her. "Where? I do not know. It was wooded. There was a sharp turn and then—" Her voice caught. "There were 2 children, a boy and a girl. I think they were with me." Owen's brow furrowed. "Your siblings?" Rowena shook her head. "No, I was taking them somewhere. Their father had died. Their mother. She begged me to take them west. I was hired to bring them to their uncle in Oregon." "Their names were Laurel and Luke." His chest tightened. "Were they in the river with you?" "I do not know." Her voice broke. "I remember screaming for them." Owen stood. "We will go back. I will help you find them." They left as soon as the sun burned the mist off the valley. He packed food and blankets, saddled the mare and his mule, and rode with her along the river road, following the path upstream. Broken branches marked the place where a stage might have veered off. They found the wreck by a bend in the road 2 miles up. The coach was splintered against a tree, wheels shattered. One man lay beneath it, face down in the mud. Rowena stared at him, her lips parting in a silent gasp. "He was the driver," she whispered. His name was Ali. Owen moved carefully, searching the area. Then he heard its soft crying coming from a hollow beneath an uprooted tree. "Rowena," he called, "over here." She ran to his side. Two children huddled in the dark, clutching each other, shivering. The boy had a scrape down his cheek. The girl looked barely 6, Laurel. "Luke!" Rowena dropped to her knees, arms out. They rushed into her embrace, crying. Owen stood back, heart pounding. She was weeping too, holding them tight, whispering their names like a prayer. When they got back to the cabin that night, the fire was warm, the stew was hot, and the world had changed. Owen watched her tuck the children in, her hand brushing Laurel's damp curls, her voice soft and steady. She turned and caught him watching. Her face flushed. "Thank you," she said. "You do not need to thank me." "I do. You saved my life and theirs." Owen scratched the back of his neck. "Well, you are all safe now. That is what matters." She stepped closer. "That is not all that matters." His breath slowed. "No," her voice was quiet. "I do not know how to explain it. But when you pulled me from that water, it felt like everything was supposed to change." Owen looked at her, really looked. The way her mouth trembled, the way her eyes held his like she had finally stopped running. He reached out and took her hand. "You were meant to survive," he said. "Maybe that means something." She nodded slowly, eyes filling. "Maybe it means everything." And for the first time in years, Owen Ashford felt it stir hope. Not the kind that flickered and faded, but the kind that stayed steady and real. It had her name on it. The sound of eggs cracking into a tin bowl carried in the morning stillness. Rowena stood at the small table, sleeves pushed to her elbows, hair loosely braided down her back. Owen watched from the doorway, arms crossed, shoulder leaning against the frame. The children were outside gathering kindling, their soft voices rising now and then through the open window. "I didn't know if your hens would let me near," she said without turning. "The red one, she's got an attitude." "She pecks everyone," Owen said. "Even me." Rowena glanced over her shoulder, a smile flickering before she looked back to the bowl. "I used to help my aunt in Ohio. Her hens were worse. One chased the preacher's wife clean across the yard." He stepped inside, taking the coffee pot from the stove. "You were raised there, mostly," she said. "After my mother passed, I stayed with my father's sister. She taught me how to sew and keep a ledger, said a woman should be useful no matter where she ends up." Owen poured 2 cups, setting one beside her. "Seems like you listened." Her hands paused just a moment. "I tried, but I didn't expect to end up here." He nodded slowly, watching the way her fingers resumed their rhythm, steady and sure. "You ever had plans to stay somewhere?" he asked. She met his gaze then. "I wanted to once. There was a man, he ran a dry goods shop in Canton. Kind, dependable, but he wanted children and I wasn't ready to settle into being someone else's idea of a wife." Owen took a sip of coffee. "That's fair." Rowena slid the pan onto the stove. "What about you?" He hesitated. "I had a brother. Younger. We were supposed to start a cattle run together down near Abilene. He enlisted instead. Never made it home." She turned fully, leaning back against the table. "That why you came north?" "I couldn't stand the empty places anymore. Thought if I went far enough, I'd outrun the quiet. Build something of my own." He looked down into his cup. "Didn't think I'd end up with company." She crossed the room slowly. "Do you mind it?" He looked up. "No." Outside, the children's footsteps crunched over pine needles. Laurel pushed the door open, cheeks pink. "We found a whole pile of dry sticks under the cart." Rowena wiped her hands. "Good, stack them by the wall, careful with the splinters." Luke trailed behind, holding a small feather between his fingers. "There's a bird's nest above the shed. I think one hatched this morning." Owen crouched beside him. "You leave it be, all right. Let the mother come back." The boy nodded solemnly. After breakfast, Owen hitched the wagon. Supplies were running low, and the trip to Alder Gulch would take most of the day with the added weight. He packed a jar of lard, 2 sacks of oats, and a rifle wrapped in canvas. Rowena stood beside the wagon, her eyes on the mountains beyond the trees. "I'll stay with them." "You sure?" he asked. "I can keep them busy. Laurel wants to help mend that curtain, and Luke's been asking about the map you keep by the hearth." He adjusted the harness. "I should be back before dark." She stepped closer, brushing a pine needle from his sleeve. "Be careful." Her fingers lingered before they dropped. He touched the brim of his hat and climbed onto the bench, the trail wound west, the sun climbing hard behind him. When he reached the trading post, he traded a slab of venison for flour, took coffee and salt, and bought a length of calico that matched the blue in Rowena's eyes. He caught himself doing it without thinking and didn't bother to talk himself out of it. He wanted to see her wear it. By the time he got back, the sky was deepening. The children were asleep in the loft. Rowena sat near the hearth, mending a torn sleeve by lamplight. "You're back," she said, setting down the needle. "Everything's in the shed," he replied, hanging his hat. "Got you something." He handed her the folded cloth. She opened it slowly, fingertips brushing the fabric her breath caught. "This is beautiful. Figured you could make something useful out of it." She looked up. "It's too fine for a curtain," he rubbed the back of his neck. "Then don't make a curtain." She stood, holding the fabric to her chest. "No one's ever brought me something just for the sake of it." "I didn't know I had," he said, voice low. They stood quiet. The fire crackled. The lamp hummed. Rowena stepped closer. "You did." Her hand brushed his, not by accident. Her skin was warm. She didn't pull away. Owen's voice was barely a whisper. "You planning to stay long?" "I haven't made plans," she said, eyes searching his. "But I could." He reached up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'd like that." She leaned into his touch. And for the first time in his life, Owen Ashford felt the future shift, not in thunder or fire, but in the hush between two heartbeats, in the way a hand fit into his like it belonged there. They said nothing more that night. They didn't need to. The first snow came early that year, a quiet dusting that softened the edges of the pines and turned the clearing outside Owen's cabin a pale silver. Rowena stood at the window, arms crossed, watching the flakes drift down like they meant something. The children were still asleep, curled up beneath quilts she'd patched the week before using scraps from Owen's old shirts. He came in from the shed with a bundle of firewood, boots leaving a wet trail across the floor. She turned toward him, brushing her hands on her apron. "You think it'll last?" she asked. He set the wood beside the hearth. "No telling. Sky's heavy, though. Could be a long one." She nodded, then glanced back toward the loft. "I've been thinking. If it does settle in, we'll need to make sure the chimney's cleared proper." The smoke pushed back a little this morning. "I'll take care of it this afternoon," he said, pulling off his gloves. "You've got a good eye." She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice had shifted. "There's something I'd like to ask." He crossed to the stove, took down the kettle, and poured hot water into the basin. "Go on." She moved to the table, resting her fingers lightly on the edge. "I've been writing to the children's uncle, the man in Oregon." I didn't want to say anything until I was sure he'd received word. He stilled, setting the kettle down. "And," he wrote back, said he's grateful they're safe. But he's unwell consumption from what he said. He won't be able to take them in. Owen looked toward the loft, then back at her. "What does that mean for them?" Rowena's hands tightened around the apron ties at her waist. "It means they stay here with me until I can figure out what's next." A long silence settled between them. "You thinking of leaving?" he asked finally. She didn't look away. "I'm thinking about what's best for them. This place is quiet and it's kind, but I don't want to put more on you than you signed up for." He walked over, took her hand, and held it gently. "I didn't sign anything. You and those two came into my life same as rain comes to dry land. I didn't ask for it, but I damn sure won't see it go." She blinked, the tension in her shoulders easing just slightly. "You mean that?" "I do," he said, "but I reckon that only matters if you want to stay." She looked down at their hands, then up again. "I want to stay. I just don't know what that makes us." Owen didn't answer her with words. He stepped closer, resting his free hand at her waist, careful and sure. She didn't pull back. Outside, the snow thickened, settling into the seams of the world. Inside, the warmth between them grew, steady as the fire. Later that afternoon, while Laurel and Luke helped Owen draw water from the creek's edge, Rowena stood on the cabin steps, arms wrapped around herself. She watched the three of them laughing at something Luke had said. Owen crouched beside them with his sleeves rolled up, teaching them how to knot the rope around the bucket's handle. When they came back up the path, cheeks ruddy and hands red from cold, Owen caught her eye across the yard. She didn't look away. That evening after supper, the children fell asleep early, worn out from the cold. She stood by the stove, drying her hands on a cloth when he came up behind her. "I've been meaning to ask," he said, voice low. She turned. "What is it? You ever think about starting again?" "Not just for the children, for yourself." She folded the cloth slowly. "I've thought about it more lately than I ever have, but it'd have to be with the right man, someone who sees me for what I am, not what he wants me to become." He reached for her hand again. "I see you, Rowena. And I want what's already here." She leaned into him then, head resting against his chest. His arms came around her, warm and solid, and for the first time since she'd climbed out of that river, she didn't feel like she was surviving anymore. She felt like she'd found home. By mid-December, the cold had deepened into the kind that didn't leave, settling into the bones of the land and drawing the days shorter than seemed right. Owen had taken to cutting wood before first light, the axe's rhythm carrying through the trees like a hymn to the hour. Rowena would wake to the sound, slip into her boots and stoke the coals in the stove, careful not to wake the children. One morning, she pulled a letter from the parcel shelf above the hearth. The paper was creased and faded, the ink pressed heavy by a hand unused to writing. She hadn't touched it since late November. Now she unfolded it slowly, lips pressed together, reading the words again beneath the soft light of the oil lamp. When Owen stepped back inside, shaking snow from his shoulders, she folded the letter and slid it into her apron pocket without comment. "You didn't eat yet?" he asked, brushing damp curls from his forehead. "I will," she replied, pouring water into the pot. "I needed a moment." He watched her closely but didn't ask. Instead, he set the kindling beside the stove and took down the tin of coffee. She waited until the kettle began to hum. That letter was from the children's mother's sister, back in Pennsylvania. He didn't interrupt. She'd heard about the wreck. Someone wrote to her from Fort Benton. She asked if Laurel and Luke were still alive and if they'd be returned. Owen's jaw tensed, but he kept his voice even. "Did she say what she'd do with them?" She said she'd put them under a cousin's care, a family with 6 already, tobacco farmers. Said they'd have a roof and chores and not to expect much else. Rowena stirred the oats slowly, her back to him. "I haven't written her back." Owen stepped closer, the warmth of his body steady behind her. "You thinking maybe you should?" "I'm thinking I've come to love them more than I thought I could love anything again." She turned, holding the wooden spoon in both hands. "And I'm thinking that they sleep through the night now. They laugh. They don't flinch when someone raises a voice. That has to mean something." "It means they're home," he said. She looked up. "Do you believe that?" "I do," he said. "It's not blood that makes a child safe, it's who stays." Rowena set the spoon down, slowly wiping her hands. "I need to be sure I'm not keeping them out of fear. That I'm not holding on because I lost too much else." "You're not," Owen said, voice firm. "You didn't hold on. You built something." Later that day, while the children played with carved horses in the loft, Rowena slid the letter into the fire. The paper curled, blackened, and folded into itself as if it had never been. That night she sat beside Owen on the porch, the sky scattered with stars so sharp they looked like they might bleed. The mountains cut clean against the horizon, and the wind moved through the trees, low as breath. "You ever think about building onto the cabin?" she asked. He looked over at her profile, lit by the faint glow from the window. "I have," he said. "Wasn't much reason to before," she nodded slowly. "There is now. Laurel's asking for her own space. And Luke keeps setting his socks in the flower bin," he chuckled. "I'll start drawing up what we'll need. Could add a room off the back, maybe a proper root cellar while we're at it." She leaned her shoulder against his. "I like that plan." They sat quiet for a while after that, listening to the soft creak of the pines and the muffled laughter from inside, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. Then she spoke again, voice low. "I'd want us to be named together. If the law were ever to ask," Owen turned to her fully, You mean marriage? I mean I wouldn't want us ever questioned, she said, about who we are to each other or to them. He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. There's no part of me that wouldn't say yes to that. She looked up with tears in her eyes, but not from sorrow. Then ask me right. He squeezed her hand and smiled soft. Rowena Whitlow, would you be mine, to walk beside me, raise these children, and grow what we've started? She nodded, voice tight. I would. And between them, the world changed again, not with thunder or fire, but with the quiet certainty of two people choosing each other, fully and without fear. By late March, the ground began to soften. The snow that had pressed down on the valley for months thinned into gray slush, and small green shoots pushed up near the cabin's eaves. The air smelled different now, less of smoke, more of wet earth and thawed bark. The children spent more time outside, boots caked in mud, their laughter echoing off the trees. Owen had started the foundation for the addition. He dug alongside Luke, who insisted on helping despite the way he kept dropping the spade to chase after the neighbor's stray dog that had taken to following him. Laurel sat on a nearby stump, drawing in a notebook Rowena had stitched together from scrap paper. She paused now and then to call out measurements like she was the foreman of the job. Rowena watched from the porch, a basket of mending beside her. She'd taken to humming under her breath, a low tune she didn't recognize but couldn't seem to stop. Her fingers moved steadily over the fabric in her lap, but her attention kept drifting to where Owen was lifting a beam into place with his shoulder. You're going to pull something, she called. He glanced over, wiping his brow with the back of his wrist. Only thing I'm pulling is this house into shape. She shook her head but didn't hide her smile. That evening, after the children had been bathed and tucked into their beds, Owen sat with her by the stove, a ledger open across his knees. He'd started keeping track of expenses, tools, nails, feed anything that might help them stay ahead of whatever might come. Rowena leaned over his shoulder, her hand resting lightly along his back. You're writing neater than when we first met. You're the one who made me start using a straight edge, he said. Told me if I was going to run a home, I needed to keep order like a banker. You remember that? I remember everything you've told me. Even the things you didn't say out loud. She turned her face toward his and the lamplight caught the softness around her eyes. You're not the same man who pulled me out of that river. He closed the book gently. I hope not. You've built something here, she said, not just walls and a roof. You've made it so a woman like me can breathe again. He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing the inside of her wrist. You gave me reason, you gave all of this shape. She looked at him for a long moment, then stood and crossed to the small cupboard. From the top shelf she brought down a cloth-wrapped parcel. This was my mother's, she said, unwrapping it slowly. Inside was a folded piece of linen embroidered with faded thread. It was a marriage cloth, a tradition her aunt had told her about once. A woman would stitch it in her youth, and if she ever married, she'd line it into a quilt or hang it over her door. I'd forgotten I still had it, she said. Found it last week tucked between the pages of that old hymn book. Owen took it from her hands, running his fingers over the worn stitches. You want to hang it. I want to make it ours, she said. If you still want to be named together like we said. He looked up at her, the quiet certainty in her voice filling everything around them. I do. They married in the clearing behind the cabin, beneath the bare-limbed cottonwoods just as the first buds began to show. Laurel insisted on carrying a basket of pine cones in place of flowers, and Luke wore a vest Owen had let out twice in the last month. Rowena wore a dress she'd sewn from the deep blue calico Owen had brought back last winter, the one he hadn't known would one day be her wedding cloth. The man who officiated was a cattleman from 2 ridges over. Someone Owen had traded fence wire with every spring. He had a Bible with cracked leather and a voice that shook when he said the words, but the vows were spoken true, and the silence that followed was full of more than sound could hold. Afterward, they sat by the fire, plates balanced on their knees, the children sleeping warm in the loft above. Rowena leaned into Owen's side, her fingers curled beneath his. "Are you happy?" he asked. She turned toward him. "Yes, and not the kind that's waiting to be taken, the kind I can rest in." He kissed her forehead, the place where the scar from the river still faintly traced her skin. "You're safe, Rowena. You're home." Years passed. The addition held through storms and seasons. Laurel grew into a clever, sharp-eyed girl who kept her own ledger beside the stove and dreamed of running a store in town. Luke took to horses with ease, and by the time he was 12, he was breaking colts gentler than men twice his age. Rowena kept the house not as a duty, but as a craft. Each shelf, each curtain, each jar of preserved apple slices sealed with care. She taught reading to children from nearby homesteads, and on Sundays, she and Owen would sit on the porch long after the sun had gone down, their hands still twined together like they had been from the beginning. Owen never left the valley again. He didn't need to. Everything he'd once gone looking for had found him instead in a woman who had nearly drowned, in two children who'd brought laughter back to his walls, in a life he'd built not from running, but from staying. And every spring, when the thaw came and the river rose, Rowena would walk to the bank's edge and stand quiet for a moment before turning back toward the cabin, where Owen waited, coffee hot, fire lit, and a place beside him kept warm.